Okay, this is primarily for onboard use. So we are mainly looking at the marine field of it, and we're not looking at the offshore field or like aviation or any other field. So how it is typically done in the marine field. The learning objective for this particular session is we'll talk about what is risk assessment, the basic terms, definitions, what all we use. Then we come over to why do we do this risk assessment on board? I mean, why go through this process of taking the pains of doing this risk assessment? Then we also talk about the principles of risk assessment and its management on board. When we talk about risk management, we also talk about the various elements of risk assessment and its management. What are the factors to be considered when evaluating the risks? And once we know what are the risks, how do we control them and how do we manage these risks? And in the end, how to record this, how to do how to formally record this thing, and then carry on the risk assessment on board, and also do the reviewing once it is done. So we're going to be talking about all through this points 1 to 7, and the target audience for this. I mean, I'm not going to go into the depth into management level kind of a thing. The target audience for this particular module is basically from ship staff, from operational level and support level, who would be involved in preparing the risk assessment on board. So that means tomorrow, if you're going to be as a junior officer, if you're going to take up a task of risk management, you will know what are the various points to be covered up and how it is done and why it is done. So let's go ahead with this class of risk assessment. All right, now we see a picture of tiger. One is in the open and one is in the cage. So which of the picture is dangerous? Is this tiger which is roaming around in the open, is it dangerous? Or the tiger which is in the cage is dangerous? So which one would be I would be scared of, if I can use another word, which one is more dangerous for me?
Tiger is in the open.
The outside one.
Outside one, exactly. The reason being, the tiger in the open is it can come and catch us and all. Whereas the same tiger is now sitting inside a cage. It's snaring at me, but then we're not afraid of it. We're not worried about it. The reason, because we know for sure that the cage is going to hold it. That means the tiger is not going to be coming out. I can be standing even 1 meter away from this cage, if not closer, but nothing would happen to me. But I won't even venture out at least about 500 meters from this tiger which is in the open. So this is the basic of risk assessment. This is something which we do normally. We use it for when you're crossing the road. We do risk assessment. That means we check, we look for left, right, and again left, and then we can see if everything is safe before we go ahead with crossing the road. This is something which we do informally a lot of times in our daily life. But when we talk about marine risk assessment, when we're talking about risks on board, they need to be done a little more formally and a little more structurally. So that is what we are coming out now. So now, in the same picture, let us talk about what are we really doing about it now. So first is the hazard. Now, when we talk about a hazard, what are we talking? What are we afraid of in the tiger? What can the tiger do to us?
It can harm us.
Anybody?
Bite us, kill us.
Bite us, kill us, and it will have us for lunch. So, and we don't want to be a lunch for the tiger. So now that is a major hazard. That means the hazard is the tiger coming and killing us, biting us, and ultimately a loss. I mean, we will die and the life is lost. Now, when we compare these two pictures now, that means the hazard is common for both. That means the tiger in the open and the tiger in the cage. If I go near it, it will surely I'll end up as a lunch for the tiger. Now, my next question is, what is the likelihood of that happening for the tiger in the open and the tiger in the cage? Likelihood is basically a chance, probability, if I can call it other ways. What is the probability of a tiger in the open eating me, and what is the probability of a tiger eating me when it is in the cage? So, what would be the answer for that?
Really unlikely in the first case. Second case.
Yeah, so second case is highly unlikely because I've got this cage, a very strong barrier which is there that will prevent the tiger from coming and killing. So if I can talk about likelihood, the likelihood is very, very high. The probability is very high in the open as compared to when we talk about in the cage. Next, we talk about the consequences. Now, if I'm going to end up standing next to a tiger, then what are the consequences? Are they same in both the cases? Are they different in both the cases?
Different.
the consequences would be the same, because if I end up like what you call very close to the cage, the tiger will just pull me through it. Maybe it'll snatch my maybe arms or legs or whatever it is, and then that is going to be very very severe catastrophic consequences for me. So here we're talking about all these things. So now looking at these two tigers, if I'm going to talk about a risk perception now, in the risk perception, which one would be risky, which one would be safer?
One will be risky, two will be safe.
Yes, one would be risky. So that is exactly what we have. The tiger in the open is risky. The tiger in the cage is safe for me. So now you understood now. The tiger is the same. The hazard is the same. The consequences more or less the same. Okay. But the likelihood, that is something what is the primary thing over here. The likelihood changes the whole equation for me from being risky and being safe. So these are the various terms we are going to be using very, very frequently, very often in these risk assessments when we do on board also. We're talking about hazards, we're talking about likelihood, the chances, we're talking about consequences. That is what can happen, the worst case scenario, like what is the worst possible scenario which can happen. And then ultimately we come to a term what is called as a risk. And then we deem it a particular job as risky or a particular job as safe. Is that basic understood for all?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, clear.
Yeah, okay. So now, when we go ahead with this same thing, we will go ahead and we will start defining these hazards, these various points like hazard, likelihood, consequences, risk. And then in the end, we'll come to something called an acceptable risk that we will discuss in a little more detail. So what do you mean by a hazard? Hazard in a simple word is called danger. Anything which is a danger, which will do something, will do me some harm, it has got some potential to do some undesired event. So as per definition, it's a substance, a situation, or a practice that has a potential to cause harm or danger. So in our simple words, we can just relate hazard to a danger. Now next term which we use very, very often is likelihood. Now likelihood in a simple thing is chance. What is the chance of that thing happening? Now that is as simple as likelihood. So it's basically a probability of that particular danger which will result in damage, a personal injury or an undesired event. So likelihood is something like, if I can call it like what is the chance of that particular event happening? Now again, as we discussed about the consequences in the previous example, the consequences is the highest level of damage. When we do this risk assessment, we go to the highest level. That means we don't go in small terms. We assume that the worst case scenario. So highest level of damage possible when an accident occurs from a particular hazard. Now remember that when we're doing a risk assessment, we have multiple hazards. That means all these things will have to be jotted down for individual hazards. In the end, we come to what is called as a risk. Now risk is a combination. That means it is not only about the likelihood, it is about the consequences also. So it's a combination of these two. It's a combination of likelihood and the consequences which decide whether a particular hazard is, whether a particular job is risky or whether a particular thing what we do is risky or not. So risk is a combination of likelihood and the severity. And if I can make a simple equation, there are a lot of other complex equations available for for determining this finite risk and all. But for our onboard use, we just stick to the basics. So we have likelihood multiplied by consequences. That defines risk. Now my question is, can I take out all the risk in life? Can we, like, before we do any job, can I take out the risk completely? That means what I'm asking is,
No, sir.
yeah. So there is something called, we we accept some risk. When we cross a road, it is very risky. Something will come and hit us. We will fall and trip down. But does it mean that we will not cross the road? We will cross the road. So we are ready to take some amount of risk, and that risk is called acceptable risk. So the risk exposure, what is acceptable to our organization? In our case, it's a company, it's an SMS. Whatever is defined in the SMS, whatever is acceptable for us. That means every company, every institution, every organization will deem a particular amount of risk as acceptable. That much of risk they can take. Because if I wait for a situation to come wherein the risk is zero, that is impossible, and that condition is never going to happen. So we are going to use a word called as low as reasonably practicable. That means we are going to try to reduce the risk to as low as possible. As you all said just now, it is impossible to make the risk as zero. There will be still some amount of residual risk always in the background, and we will try to make it as low as possible. Is this topics? Is this like the definitions and explanations clear? Because we're going to be using a lot of these words, so these things should be clear. Anybody has got any doubts? Any doubts in these terms what we're using?
No, sir. No.
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
All right. If at all you have any problems in internet connectivity or something, you can always use the chat function in the bottom. You can type your message across, and somebody from the admin will look at it, and then they will prompt me the answer. Right. So now we'll go to the next slide. Why do we have to do the risk assessment? Now, like you all know, on board, there is always a reason for doing it. There's always a reason for doing something. Anything what we do on board, we don't do it just for fun or something like that. So the primary reason why we do risk assessment on board is because it is part of your legislations. It is part of your statutory requirements. Now, as per ISM code in chapter 1.2.2, it clearly says the company, that is the company, the ISM company, what we're talking about, the company should provide for safe practices in a ship operation and a safe working environment. It also mentions assess all identified risks. Now, what is the meaning of assessing all identified risks? That's what we come to a term called risk assessment. Is it clear? So that is one reason why it has become mandatory, because it is part of ISM code. And as you all know, ISM code is part of SOLAS. That means whatever is mentioned in the ISM code is mandatory for all the ships. Now we come to the next reason why we do it. It improves the safety on board. Now, just like we were giving an example of crossing the road, we look left, right, again, look left, right, again. Just that improves your safety. So similarly, when you're talking about safety on board, the risk assessment makes a life much safer. And the statistics always shows that if all these if the small risks could have been avoided, then the accidents number also is drastically reduced. That's the reason why we always prefer doing this risk assessment on board. And the last thing what we do is, it is the right thing to do. Of course, it's a moral thing. Ethically, it is the right thing to do. Who would want to have accidents on board? I mean, that completely spoils the whole ambience on board a ship and all. So we want to have a happy ship. We want to run a safe and smiling people on board. So that is the reason why we do a risk assessment, in which everybody is doing their things safely without accidents, and the whole job process, the whole process is under control. So that is the reason why we do risk assessment on board. Is it clear? Can we go to the next chapter?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, please, when you're doing a risk assessment, don't consider this as a paperwork or a load, yet another paperwork to be filled up. Because if this risk assessment is done correctly and as it is supposed to be done, it adds a lot of value to the safety on board a ship. We just now saw there's a big poster put on the stencil put on the front of the bulkhead of the ship. Safety first. That is not just for showpiece or something. It is our own safety. The people who are going to work on board, as it is, it's a risky environment, so we don't want to add any more dangers to it. So please don't consider this as yet another checklist to be filled up. Don't consider this as yet another workload for you. If it is done correctly, you can improve the safety on board. Ultimately, the risk is less, the safety improves. I mean, the level of safety improves on board. So please don't take it up as yet another paperwork to be filled up, or yet another load or something we have to fill up this also and all. Please do it. Take it in the right spirit, and then get this thing done so as to improve the safety on board. Yeah. Next, we go to the principles of risk assessment. Now, this requires a little bit of explanation. Now, the first thing in risk assessment is hazard identification. We'll talk in details. I'll just quickly run through these 5 points, which will be discussed in much more detail in the further slides. Once we identify the hazards, now we know what is the risk presented by each hazard. Now, once we know what is the risk from each hazard, we also know how to control them. Now, that is what is something called as a risk control. Then we come to something called monitoring. Monitoring is a process where the job is being done and and one of the officer, like something like a typically a safety officer on board, he monitors, is the risk assessment, is it working correctly or not? That means whatever risk you've evaluated, whatever the controls you've taken, is it being done correctly or not? In the end, towards the end, after the job is done, we also have to do a review. That means we have assumed something during this risk evaluation and risk control. Is that assumption correct? Is the risk perception, has the risk assessment made the job much more safer, or did you experience any dangerous situations in the middle? So that is what is a cycle. That means whatever we come to know after the review, that's again put up in the hazard identification, and then again the cycle goes on. That means it's not a static job, it's a dynamic job. It is not that we do one risk assessment and then closed off with it. We can use the same risk assessment again and again and again next time. It's a dynamic thing. Each time situation is different. The circumstances are different. So that means we have to go through the whole process again so that we don't have any issues with, we can improve the safety on board, and then the chances of accidents happening is reduced. Okay, now we're going into the elements of risk assessment. The first element being the hazard identification. This is probably the most difficult part because there are n number of hazards. That means there are so many hazards for a particular job that we have to take into account all these hazards. Now, this is where this risk assessment becomes very, very important, that it is done structurally. It has to be done in a systematic manner. We just can't ask a question and then say, okay, fine, this job is ready to go. It's okay to do. Now, who would do the hazard identification? Is it somebody who is not even related to the job, or as somebody has done the job about 10 years, 15 years back, and then he's told to find out what are the hazards in a particular job? So who is the best person to do this hazard identification?
The person in charge.
The person in charge, but then again, the person in charge, yes, what you're saying is also correct. But then the person in charge has not done that particular job for a long time. That means he may stay disconnected.
The person who is going to do the job.
Yeah, the person who is in charge of the job, the person who is doing the job, the person who is entrusted with carrying out that particular job. Now, those type of persons are really good in hazard identification. We need somebody experienced also. If you can take an example of, let us say, a brand new guy. It is his first ship. He comes and he's told to do a risk assessment, compared to somebody, a senior bosun or maybe a senior chief officer who has been on board a ship for many, many years. So who is the best man for identification, hazard identification? Yes?
The senior person.
Senior person. I would not say senior person, a person with experience. Yeah, good experience. Because seniority does not mean...
master.
No, again, we will just stick to our keyword over here, that is experience. Because if you have good experience in that particular job, then you can identify all the hazards. The first step is identification of hazards. So that is why we have to have somebody who's got a detailed knowledge and who is well versed with that particular job. If he's called in for finding out the hazards or the various hazards, then the job is much more easier. Now, when we do a hazard identification, like I said, you don't need a master. It's not that you only need a master for doing all these things. Even a person with, let's say, 3-4 years of experience, even a person with, let's say, 1 or 2 couple of 10 years, or even a person who is a fresh first-time joiner, but if he's been exposed to a particular job on and on again, like mooring operations, the first time you do it, yes, it is. You feel it is risky. Second time, you learn a lot of safety features and all. Fifth time, sixth time, seventh time, eighth time, you become more experienced. So don't take into account your seniority or your actual sea time what you put in. The experience basically means how much of exposure he has got to that particular activity. So now when you're doing this, the hazard identification for a particular job, for a particular activity, there are some 3 major questions to be answered. Now, where is the source of harm? Where is the source of danger? What is more dangerous? So that if you can answer that question, you will get half of your hazard identification. Second question is, who or what can be harmed? That means, is it a injury? A personal injury? Is it a damage to equipment? Is it environmental damage which is happening? So all that can be done, answered by that particular question. And the last question is, how could the harm happen? Is it because of a process? Is it because of a failure of machinery? Is it because of all these reasons? So just keep a note of these 3 questions when you're going for your hazard identification. Where is the source of harm? Who could be or what could be harmed, and how can the harm occur? So once we sorted out these 3 points, then we'll have bulk of our hazard identification. So let's look at few examples of hazards. All right. Now, let us say I'm going into let us say a pump room or maybe an enclosed space. Now, what is a hazard over there? Hazard is a flammable gas or liquid being present inside. If it's a flammable gas, what can be the consequences of it? Explosion, fire, and so on. All right. That means the hazard over here is the flammable liquids or gas. It is not the explosion. Explosion is a consequence. It's an event which happens because of this particular hazard. Next example is like I put in over here, slippery surfaces. Can happen in the engine room, can happen in the accommodation, can happen on deck, anywhere else also. The slippery surfaces is a hazard. Now, what can that hazard lead to? It leads to slips, fall by person, and so on and so forth, fractures and so on and so on. So, slippery surfaces here is a hazard. And again, we take an example of this enclosed space entries. Lack of oxygen is a hazard. What it can lead to is a asphyxiation, that is lack of breathlessness and lack of oxygen for a person who is going down. So is it understood now? How do you classify? I mean, how do you identify the hazards, and what are the key questions to be asked for this hazard identification?
Yes, sir.
Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Any questions? Please go ahead. If you have any queries, please feel free to ask, or you can type it in the chat function, and we'll come back to you.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon.
Sir, just now you told that this flammable liquid or gas which is present inside a tank or any enclosed space that we are entering, that will lead to explosion. So that explosion is the hazard identification, or is it a risk evaluation?
No. Again, see, hazard is a danger. Now, if I can go back to my definitions over here on top. Now look at this thing now. Hazard is a danger. Is it a substance, situation, or a practice? Now, when you talk about entering into an enclosed space, what is a substance inside an enclosed space which can lead to like a danger and all? It's a substance. That means that toxic gas is a
Flammable
hazard for
gases.
Okay. So what can the toxic gas do? It can disable me. I will fall down unconscious, or probably it can lead to death also. So that is something as a consequence. So this is some basic like what you call. Sometimes there's a confusion between a hazard and a consequence. Hazard is a substance, is a physical phenomena, is a substance or a situation. Now, what can that lead to is a consequence. So, like the example which I gave over here is the flammable gas or liquid is a hazard because it's a substance, it is present in the enclosed space. Now, what can that do? That can lead to explosion. That is a consequence.
Yes.
Is the point clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
All right. Anybody else? Any questions?
No, clear so far.
Okay. All right. Great. So then we go to the next thing, which is the risk evaluation. So here in the previous slides, what we have done is we have identified all the hazards point by point, and now for each hazard, we are going to be finding out the risk. How much of the risk is there? This risk evaluation is actually the whole point of doing this risk assessment. It forms the heart and soul of risk assessment. The risk assessment, it gives us estimation of the risk. That means how much is it risky or not risky. But it's again it's a statistical feature. It is not accurate, 100% accurate. I can't say that the job is completely risk free, or the amount of risk what I'm going to put across to it is 100% risk free. The situations may change, the circumstances may change, and so all these variables are there when we do this risk assessment. So as we discussed earlier, the risk severity is a multiplication. It's a simple multiplication of likelihood and consequence. So on board, when we do this risk assessment, first we find out the hazards, and then we sit back and discuss what is the likelihood of that particular hazard happening. Let's take a simple case of, let's say, mooring operation. Mooring operations, we all know, including involves the use of mooring winches, mooring ropes, and all. So if I can ask you a question, what is the likelihood of a mooring rope parting during a mooring operation? So now we have to worry about the likelihood. That means we're going to talk about your own personal experience. We're going to talk about industry experience. We're going to talk about your the experience shared by your company, by your friends, and all. And then we come to a likelihood. We come to a approximation. It's only a best approximation. There's no. I mean, I can't say that the event will not happen again at all. but it's a good approximation of what can be the likelihood of it. Now, a person who has never had a mooring rope parted in his life, what will he put the likelihood as? Highly unlikely, is it not? And a person who has had a lot of the mooring rope accidents, he will put the likelihood as very, very high, like almost
Very
every time it
likely.
may happen. So there is this subjectivity which is there. And that is what makes the risk assessment dynamic, because depending on the circumstances, depending on the kind of experience what you have, this likelihood value changes more or less. Now, when we come to consequence, if a rope parts and if you're standing close to it, what are the consequences?
Injury.
Accidents will happen.
Somebody will get
The
hurt.
rope may break.
No,
We
the
may
rope
get
may break,
injured.
that is fine, but I'm looking at the if you remember the
Casualties.
consequence again.
Casualties.
Casualty, that means loss of life. That's the worst thing what can happen on board. So, like if you
Casualty.
remember, again, I'll go back to the previous slide. We're looking at this likelihood and the consequence. If I can go to the previous slide over here, the consequence, please consider the highest level of damage. Don't consider that the rope parts and the rope just like nobody is injured or something like that. The rope parts, what is the highest level of damage which can happen?
Death.
Finish.
Loss of
Death.
life.
That is
Loss
end
of
of
life.
loss of life. So that is what we look at. That means we're looking at the likelihood, which is subjective, but the consequence, more or less, we all know about it. Consequences basically means what is the worst case scenario, what can happen. Understood now? So that is what is its risk severity, and that is what we do. So when we talk about a job which is risky or not risky, we have a couple of examples in the later. There we will discuss more about this risk and likelihood and consequence, and then we'll see how these two combine together and give us something as what is called as risk. Now remember, this consequences has got multiple phases. That means it is not only about the death or something what we're talking about. Now let's take the case of accident. Yes, a death has occurred. Now this news will come in the newspaper. It will come in the Facebook. It will come in all these like what you call media and all. Now what will happen to the name of the company? The name of the company is tarnished. That means people will start making speaking that, oh, that company, they don't have any safety standards. Now, when that happens, what happens to the market image of that particular company? There's a loss of
It
reputation
comes
because
down.
it comes down because then you don't get cargo. If you don't get cargo, no shipper will give any cargo to that particular company. Why? Because they have a lot of accidents. So please don't look at the consequences only in the terms of personal safety, like life or death or something. Personal safety has got multiple phases. The first thing is, of course, personal safety. That's the topmost priority for us. We all first want us to be safe on board a ship. So that takes the first highest priority. Second point is environmental damage. What is the pollution angle to it? Of course, people will be safe, but then that will lead to pollution. Again, if you lead to pollution, then again, a lot of additional, costs are there. So that also has to be taken into account. Now, some accidents may lead to damage to vessel, equipment, or the loss of process. If a vessel is damaged, let's say collision has happened, some explosion has happened, the vessel is damaged, everybody is safe, there is no pollution, but still there is some cost. So a damage, that means a ship is lost, or maybe some equipment are lost, or the process is lost. Let us say we are doing this loading discharging operations, or we are doing some, let's say, purifier decarb, some generator decarb process, something is going on. When we have an accident, the whole process stops. That is what is meant by loss of process. That means that particular job is left incomplete. We need to start over it again and do it in a different manner. So the consequences will have to be looked into in various things. The next thing priority for the consequences is the cost. How much money, how much of dollars is lost by the company? Additional expenses. Do we have to call an additional crew or like a repair team staff to do it? Additional equipments to be done. Surveyor has to come on board and look at all these things again and deem the ship to be fit. All these things are their direct cost. That is actually the amount of dollars spent by the company. Ultimately, in the end, what happens is the loss of reputation. And now remember, it is not only the company, it's a loss of reputation for the nationality of the people also. In so many times we have seen accidents have happened. Oh, who are the nationality of the people on board? Oh, they were so and so nationality. That means we start making joke that, oh, those people are not safe and all. The loss of reputation has got a lot of repercussions. So it does not. It's a indirect damage. It cannot be measured, and the damage could be very long lasting. Is it clear? So consequences. Please look at all 5 angles, and then you decide what is the consequence. What is the worst case scenario which can happen? In some cases, the personal safety, 0 loss of life, 0 damage, 0 injury. But the loss of reputation takes priority because you lost. I mean, you have a big loss of face or loss of like what you call image or name of the company in the whole world.
So,
Yes, go ahead.
so can you please explain loss of process again?
Okay, loss of process is like we are doing some job on board a ship. Let's take an example of let's say mooring operation. What does a mooring operation involve? We are going to tie up the tugs. We are going to be the ship is going to be coming alongside using the tugs or using all these third-party assistance and all. Now let us say a rope is parted, a mooring rope is parted. Can the ship be made fast alongside?
No, sir.
No.
No. That is a loss of process. That means the whole job, the whole thing of you started off doing a particular job, that process is lost. Let us take another example of loading. Loading operation is being done, and now we have a huge pollution, a huge loss of life, maybe explosion or something. Can the loading proceed any further?
No, sir.
No. That means it's a loss of process. If I can take another
So
example,
here we can consider waste. Here we can consider wastage of time also.
yeah, the wastage of time can also come up in this. Yes, that is also a good thing. But then when we talk about wastage of time, we don't. As far as safety is concerned, there is no limit for time. You can do a job in let's say 1 hour, 2 hours. As far as safety is concerned, please don't get into this time part of it. Of course, time ultimately comes in direct cost also. But then please don't be under that pressure of time because safety and time don't go get along very well.
Okay, sir.
Ultimately, yes, a loss of time ultimately also like will also lead to direct cost, which is the point number 4.
Yes. Thank you.
Any other doubts?
Sir,
Yeah.
when we talk about this loss of reputation,
Yes.
so is it the personal safety which is only contributing factor for it? Like if death happens on board
Yeah.
or some person is injured.
Correct.
So is it the personal safety that harms the reputation or all other this environmental
all others,
damage to vessel and these
all others will matter. See now,
constitute
that's the reason I said. Let us say we have this, let's say mooring operation. The same example I'll just want to continue. The mooring operation has happened. A rope is parted, mooring rope is parted. That has caused no personal lives, no personal loss. That means everybody is safe on board. No damage to pollution. No damage to vessel because only okay that the mooring rope is parted, the mooring rope is lost, but that is okay. But let's come to this loss of reputation. We don't have any loss in 1, 2, 3, 4. But imagine there was a big party waiting for you for receiving the ship. There was like the first time the ship is coming to a port, the media is there, everybody is there. Now you are in the glare of the open media now. You get it? Even though point number 1, 2, 3, 4 were not involved, whereas accident has happened in front of the whole media, that means that is going to come in the front in the newspaper, the front page of all the newspapers, in the headlines of all the news channels. Now that is a loss of reputation. So when we look into these consequences, it is not individual thing which matters. We take into account all of them and take the worst possible case in all of them. That means that the personal safety, if I say the weightage is less and the direct cost weightage is more, that means the direct cost weightage goes up in considering the consequence.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Clear? All right. So we go to the next thing. So if you see in the cycle over here, okay, like I said, some risk severity may have multiple consequences. Like I said about just now with this mooring operation, it has got multiple phases, multiple angles to be looked at. So please don't stop at one particular angle. Okay, personal safety. Okay, everybody is safe. Okay, we go to the next hazard. It doesn't work that way. So we have to look into all these 5 individual points before we go to the next hazard. All right, we were talking about this the risk evaluation. So here's a very simple example over here. Let's take this case now. So I got case number 1, which is the top left, and case number 2 is the bottom left. So we are only looking at the left-hand side case scenarios. So let's look at these various examples now. There's a man over here who is going to jump across this small gap. All right, it's a small gap, and looking at the size of the man, he can comfortably jump across it. Now there are some thorns over here. There are some nails or something. Some danger is lurking here at the bottom. That means what is the hazard over here?
The
Injury,
person
harm,
may
Death,
fall down
death,
and
death.
get
Sharp
injured.
objects.
Okay,
Loss of
you
life,
can talk
sir.
about death. You can talk personal injury, loss of life. You can talk all about that. So now,
Sharp objects.
yeah, sharp because of sharp objects, he may be injured. Now consider the same thing, the same example. Here on the left bottom, you got a small, shallower, like what do you call that, that obstruction, and the person is going to jump across. So now, what has changed over here? The person jumping is the same. He may fall here also in the second, the bottom portion also. He may fall. There may be some like he may get into some danger, personal danger. But which one is more riskier, the top one or the bottom one?
Top one is more
Top one.
fun.
Yeah,
Top
the
one.
top one is more riskier. Why? Because if he
Risk
falls
factor is
down,
ready.
yes, the consequences, even though the probability of it is both low, that means the gap is less, he can comfortably jump across. But here we're talking about the consequences of it. Here in the top case, the consequences is a high impact. That means it's very very serious. In the bottom case, what I mean, it's just maybe a 1 foot of a gap here from him. So the impact is low for him. Now we come to the right hand side example. Now what we've done is we've increased the width of that particular channel, and now both for the top and the bottom on the right hand side, the dangers are same on the top and bottom. But what has happened? What are the chances of this man jumping across in one go without any danger, without any like what do you call without any difficulties? That means we're talking about probability of an accident happening is shot up
Very
over
high.
here now. Is very high now. Why is it very high? Because as we look at it, the chances of it happening is very very high. Because it is not possible. Like maybe possible, but then again we don't know for sure. Again, the dangers are high impact. That means if he falls down inside, it's a loss of life. Whereas the bottom case, there's a high probability that he will not be able to make through. That means high probability of an accident happening here. But it is much more safer. Why? Because the gap is not much. He can comfortably navigate through that small shallow ditch and come across on the other side. Is it understood? Is the example clear now?
So in this cases, which is the acceptable risk?
Now, so we come to the next thing called acceptable risk. Now, the same example over here, we would say that the acceptable risk is somewhere if it is low or medium. When we discuss about something called as low as reasonably practicable. Now, every company will, every organization will have their own like minimal risk, how much they can take. Now, that is what we have to look at the company SMS, and then the company SMS will decide how much of risk you can take. So that is how it is taken up. So it is not done subjectively that I can. There are some people on board who can take more risk, and some people less risk and all. It is not about personal. It's about the company, because we are all working for an organization, and so we stick to that organization's rules and regulations.
Subra sir, Mr. Srijit has raised his hand.
Okay.
Mr. Srijit, you can ask it out.
So you told that as per company changes, the acceptable risk will be changing, but
Yes,
the risk is same in any cases. Why it is changing depending on the company?
Because company is company. Because again, it depends on each individual company's like what you call corporate policies, or their like what you call values, or whatever it is.
But the risk is same in both cases, right?
No, the risk is same. But again, what is the risk? The risk is something what we are calculating, what we are like assuming the risk to be. Some companies may want to take more risk. Some companies will not. I'll give you one simple example. Okay, the same example of let us say crossing a road. You must have seen so many times there are some 3 or 4 people waiting to cross a road. Now one guy will just cross the road, zip through the road without looking left, right, center. How can he go when the others are still waiting? Again, his risk perception is higher. That particular person can take more risk. Why? That is his own personal reasons. Because maybe he's got some other higher priority jobs to be done. Now, second person, he will cross the road till the half and again come back because he's scared that he cannot cross the road fully. So again, why the second person is stopping, he is not crossing the road? The same thing, because every individual, every organization, every nation also for that matter, everybody has got a different risk perception. Some of you have seen when you're going in a bus, some drivers drive rashly and they're very proud of it. Some drivers are very, very sedate. The drivers drive very, very slowly. You see, because the risk perception is different for different persons. Again, as you're exposed to more experience, as you're exposed to more situations, more circumstances, probably you will understand that yes, I may be able to take more risk comfortably. That's their personal choice.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Kirtan, any more questions?
So this may
have one
affect the
question.
reputation of the company, right?
Yeah, reputation of the company, yes, true for that time. But then again, probably they are ready to take that chance because again, we're talking about risk, which may happen, may not happen. What if it didn't happen at all? That means all the precautions that you've taken was not really worth it, probably. So again, let us not go into that particular perception because that again depends on the individual, on the organization, on the company. Again, for their own good or for bad, they have decided that they can take so much of risk. So whichever organization we are working for, we go as per that organization rules and regulations. So we can't have our own subjective risk, and I mean, what do you call that? The risk severity on for ourselves.
Probably the risk taking ability will also depend upon the competence, skill, and the
Yes,
experience of
experience
the
of the person. Exactly. Because like I've seen, I mean, those Formula One car drivers and all, they can drive at 320 kilometers per hour, 350 kilometers per hour. But we are afraid to drive even at 100 kilometers per hour. Okay, the situations are different. But again, because they're better trained, they are much more skilled than us, and they have that much of capability. So probably they can take more risk than us.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So now, what I'm going to do is the same situation. I'm going to change some circumstances. Okay. So is the evaluation same for all circumstances? That means the same person is going to jump across this pit, and same thing will happen. What if I introduce one variable? What if I change the circumstances? I just introduce one like what do you call? Let's say girl over there, and this person has got now. He's not worried about his safety now. In that consequences, if you remember those consequences, which is more important now for this particular person? We
Can
have
you
those.
please repeat?
No.
This
My
slide.
question was,
Not
I've
understood, sir.
only
Girl.
introduced one variable over here. I've introduced a girl who is watching this boy jump across. Now, will the same boy take the same amount of risk as he was taking before?
No, he don't want to
No, sir.
fall down.
No. What is
He
the
will
reason?
push the limit.
No. So then, why he can't take that risk as he was taking when nobody else was watching? He was ready to take that much of risk of jumping across. But now, when a girl is watching, he doesn't want to jump. Why?
Something wrong happens.
Something wrong happens. What will happen? If I can go back to that slide.
Reputation.
Reputation.
Loss of reputation.
Loss of reputation.
You got it now. So a lot of things are variable. That means the same job done two different times, you got two different risk assessment. And that is why we have to improve our risk assessment. That is where the experience matters. That is where the competency matters and the skill matters. So that is what the whole thing about this particular thing. So a lot of things are going in the background when the man is jumping around. If he's doing it alone, when nobody else is watching, when no world is watching, it is different. When somebody else is watching, it is different. In a real life example, in port, we are much more careful of doing any job. Why? Because if any accident happens, we are in the glare of like what do you call the limelight. Whereas the same job which is done in the middle of the sea when nobody else is watching can be done peacefully, can be done at its own pace. So just example, the work is the same, the circumstances have changed. That changes the risk perception. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now this is what we do on board a ship. So here is a risk assessment of a particular. Let's say, I mean, we have every company will have different like what do you call projections of this risk factors, what as we call it. So the first one over here, the first line over here is the frequency of it. That means if an accident happens very often, do you consider that particular hazard as a risky, or I mean that particular job as risky or non-risky? If it happens very often,
Risky.
risky. So the frequency matters. That means if it is happening very often, that means the job is risky. Now we talk about the direct cost. If you can see over here, we got this under the severity, we got direct cost. So this column is for direct cost. If it is cost is less than $5,000 for that particular company, it's a negligible cost. That means there's that much of cost they can take. It becomes minor, it becomes medium, significant, and a major cost. Anything more than $100,000 or like let's say that much of amount. If it's more than that, that means it is too risky. So every company will have this risk matrix, we call it on board. So you take up any hazard and then you see for yourself where does your risk matrix come up and join up. If it is coming up in this red sector, the red is what?
Major.
High. That means
High.
it's a red. It's like a traffic signal only. So it's a high risk. If it is coming in the medium, that means okay, that much of risk you may probably take. Whereas if it is coming in green, that means okay, we can take that much of risk. We can afford to take that much of risk in that particular job. Okay, so every company will have their own risk matrix based on which each particular hazard is evaluated and the job is taken up. Okay, now this particular thing of now that we have a risk, how do we control it? How do I make that particular job more safer? And that is called as a risk management. Now, can we eliminate the risk completely?
No, sir.
No, not possible. So we can only. So there are sometimes we can do it. I mean, sometimes we can like what do you call control this particular thing, and that is what is called as a risk management. So we have a lot of like what do you call checklists on board. We have these forms to be filled up. We have a lot of procedures and all, and that is what comes as a part of risk management. So in risk management, what we do is we either reduce the likelihood of the hazard happening, or the consequences can be reduced, or in some cases we can reduce both too. So it depends on a lot of combination of cases. So let's come into the risk controlling the risk part of it. Now, when we are talking about controlling the risk, there are mainly three options for us. The major ones, what can be done on board a ship by a person who is sailing. First is eliminating the hazard completely. Like give an example of slip, like what you call oil in the floor plate in the engine room or in deck or somewhere there. If I want to stop anybody from falling, now the oil in the floor plate, slippery floor is a hazard. How can I eliminate it?
By cleaning
it,
oil.
exactly. So the first option for you is eliminate the hazard. Second example, what I'm using over here is the mooring rope or any other rope is in poor condition. That means it's about to break. What can you do about it?
Change them.
Change it.
Change
Replace it or something like that. So that is what we call as elimination. That forms your first option. If you can eliminate the hazard, nothing like it, because then if the hazard is not there, the risk is controlled. All right. But there are some things which you cannot eliminate. Let us take a case of toxic nature of cargo, or let's say flammable nature of cargo, or bad weather. Can you control them? Can you eliminate bad weather? Can you control? Can you eliminate the toxic nature of, let's say, petroleum fuel?
No, sir.
You cannot. So you cannot eliminate them. So the things which cannot be eliminated, we are supposed to take as what is called the second point, as it is being discussed. Safety barrier and control measures have to be drawn up. Okay. So safety barriers and control measures are basically like there'll be some standard operating procedures, some checklist, permit to work system. Something would be there which will prevent that risk from going undeterred, and it can be controlled effectively. And the last one is a personal protective equipment as a last resort. So we normally, when we do the risk assessment, we don't get into this personal protective equipment like your safety helmet, glasses, and all. That comes only as a last resort. So we will look at a couple of examples in the same scenario. So first thing is elimination. Second is safety barrier, and last one is the PP. So we're talking about elimination versus control measure versus PP. So let's look at some examples now. Same thing which we discussed a few minutes back. Engine room, oily. The floor plate is oily. That is the hazard. What is the consequences? Slip and fall. Now you tell me, looking at three options. You have three options: elimination, control measures, and PP. Will the elimination take it off?
Yes.
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 If the elimination takes care of the hazard, we may not require control measures. All right. And the PP, because the hazard is anyway taken care of, so that may not be applicable at all. Next, we come to the second condition in coastal navigation. In coastal navigation, we have shallow water. That means places where the depth of the water is much less than the draft of the ship. Now, what will happen if a ship goes over there? The ship will run aground. Can I eliminate this completely?
No.
No, sir.
No. Can I dredge the whole world to be, let's say, about 20 meters or something depth? Not possible.
Not possible.
Not possible. So then here we require control measures. Control measures could be UKC policy, could be navigation policy, bridge procedure manuals. All these things can come in for controlling that particular hazard. of shallow water. Next thing what we come to is where all three procedures are required. Now mooring operations, like I gave an example of a wire or let's say a rope, which can cause injury to hand. Can I stop it? Can I eliminate it 100%?
No, sir.
Not possible. If I don't use the wires or ropes, then how do I get the ship alongside? So I need some control measures. Control measures are basically like your critical equipment. Some things would be there, like mooring operations and some checklists would be there, which makes it much more safer. Now, will the control measures take care of all the hazards? No, because if you're going to use a bare hand for let's say if you're going to use a bare hand or if you don't use the proper protective clothes, then again you may get injured. So here we introduce one more thing called PPE, and that is why for this particular hazard you require all three. I mean, we go all the way up to 3 points. Elimination not possible, so we put control measures. Control measure also does not take care of it all completely. That's why we come to this point called PPE. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right. So now we've taken care of some risk. So now we are going to talk about another thing, what is called as existing measures and additional control measures. All right. So let's take a case of a pump room entry. We're talking about an enclosed space. Pump room is normally taken up as an enclosed space on board tankers and all. And the hazards of what we're going to talk about is the gases. All right. Is it possible to eliminate?
No.
Not possible because the gases are going to be there at all times. Now, what are the additional control measures what we can take? These are control measures. That means these are things. How do you prevent from the risk from happening? So these are what is called as control measures. The ventilation is there. Then we have gas detection system. Then we have a strict entry procedures. We also have a thing called EBD, that is emergency escape breathing device, at the bottom of the pump room. And we also give a regular drills and trainings and all goes on board. So as we keep on introducing 111 control measures, the risk keeps on going down. All right. Now, is it still safe? 100% safe, if I can ask the question.
No, PP should be there.
No, so we should be somewhere over there. Now, let's talk about this EBD now. Now, what I want to do is, now if I feel that I want to keep the people very, very safe, so what I'll do is I will keep an EBD at the entrance of the pump room at every deck level, and probably what I'll do is I'll issue the EBD to everybody on board. Is it practicable?
No, sir.
Yes, sir.
Can you carry that additional load every time when you go on do a work?
No,
Not possible.
No,
And
sir.
you're going to increase. So now what we're talking about is the job. I mean, the person who's going to carry this load of EBD will not be able to do that particular job. That means you're going to spend a lot of money, but then the risk is not really taken care. All right. So the risk cannot be fully eliminated because ultimately you run up something as what is called as a cost. How much I can spend even $1 million, but then am I making the risk zero? May not be.
No, sir.
So some amount of risk what we can take is what is called as acceptable to a particular organization, and in our risk assessment words, it is known as LR. That stands for as low as reasonably practicable. Is it understood? We'll be using a lot of this LR on board a ship. That is basically we are trying to get it down to as low as reasonably practicable.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the risk can never be made zero on board a ship. There will be still some residual risk. Even after you taking the additional control measures, there will be still some risk which is there. That is what is called as a residual risk. And that risk, we are supposed to keep it as low as reasonably practicable. Okay. So now we made a very good risk assessment. Now it's a time for putting it into task. That means you're going to implement it, monitoring it during implementation. That's again a job of a safety officer or a person who is keeping a watch on all things which can go wrong during a job is done. Because remember, this risk assessment is based on a lot of assumptions. Assuming that people will do the job correctly, assuming that the tool, the particular machinery will work correctly. What if something fails? So the monitoring of the risk is very, very important as the job is being progressed, as the job is being done. Yeah. And now, after the job is done, the risk has to be reviewed. I mean, the risk management, whatever job we have done, it has to be reviewed. We have spent a lot of time in trying to assess this risk and trying to take control measures. Is it really controlling the risk? So that is what is this thing. Where there any new hazard which you never thought that can come up has come up. And what is the practicality of all these preventive measures? So all these things will be coming up in this review. Again, it is done after the job is done, so that we all get together and we'll see, okay, we did this so much of meeting, we did so much of discussion and made a risk assessment. What were the goods and bads in it? And that is how we learn. So that means whatever you review, next time when I do a hazard identification, those points are taken up into the hazard identification and the chain keeps on going on and on. So this is a cycle for risk management and risk assessment. Is it clear?
So can you explain the
Yes.
point B here?
Point B. Okay. Now the point B talks about new hazards. That means new hazards are something which are never new. Let's take a case or example of, let's say, tankers, this petroleum fuel, which is there. I've taken into account the flammability of it, but the toxicity was not taken care of. So these are the new hazards which come up when the job is like what you call is progressing. So these are something which will just happen because you can't foresee everything, anything and everything what can happen. So new situations will be happening, new dynamic things will come up, and that is what is called new hazards which can crop up when a job is being done.
So what does this thing which requires new controls means here?
No, the new hazard means, let's say, taking the same example of this toxic gases in the petroleum fuel. When he did a risk assessment, he only considered the flammability of it. The toxicity part was not taken care of because nobody on board realized that there could be some hazard for toxicity. Now, when you start doing a job, you see the meter is showing 0% LEL, no gas, no hydrocarbon gas at all, but still you're suffocating, you're nauseating. And now that is what is called new hazard. And new hazard requires new control. That means next time when I do a job, can I ignore this particular new hazard?
No, sir.
No.
No,
So
sir.
it requires new controls. New controls means new control measures, new barriers to stop that hazard from affecting you again.
Yes, I got it, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So this is a cycle of a risk management: hazard identification, risk evaluation, control, monitoring, and review. Now there are a couple of examples of some shipping companies because you'll be doing it practically on board a ship. So it talks about the various operations. The hazards involved from the second column, and here we got probability. That is what is basically likelihood. Severity is a consequence, and then we come to a risk factor. The control measures to be taken up is all listed up over here. So after you do a control measures, there could be some change in the probability and the severity because you've upfront taken some control measures. So that will get down the risk. So here from in this particular example, from the risk factor of 10 has come down to 5. And why it has come down? Because of taking additional control measures. Again over here, it is from 15, the risk factor of 15 has come down to 5. Why? Because of having taken so many control measures. So likewise, these are examples of actually like what you call operations, what we do on board. And we try to get, using the control measures, we try to get the risk down. There's another example of another shipping company. There could be n number of like examples of the risk assessments. So here, instead of numbers, the company has used medium, extremely harmful, remote. So these are various words used. So yellow means basically it's like what you call medium. We can go ahead with it. Green is good to go. There is no control measure required. And if it is red, that means stop. Take some control measures. So the format of your risk assessment on board a ship may change depending on what companies, what paperwork your company has got. But the idea remains the same. The hazard is still a hazard. The consequence is still a consequence. Okay. Any questions? Anybody?
No, sir.
No, sir. No, sir.
No, sir.
No,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank
Alright,
you.
Thank you, sir.
Great.
Thank you,
Well,
sir.
thank you very much for your valuable time for attending this session, and your feedback is indeed valuable to us. So please